Use your aggressive feelings, boy. Let the hate flow through you.
So, I was not sure that I was going to do a follow-up video in regards to Star Wars, because honestly, I want to stop thinking about it. I've had a hard time doing that. I've been thinking about the movie almost continuously since I saw it. No, I haven't seen it a second time. I don't plan to, because while I still stand by my original review and the fact that when it is good, it is great, I like the movie less overall the more that I think about it. Now, there's still something a little bit odd going on, which is that I'm seeing the conversation happen with people who are claiming that the movie is bad, or it's terrible, or it's great, or it's this, or it's that. And a lot of the issues that people seem to have are actually not the ones that I have. All right, guys, I need to say this right now at the front end. Spoilers, spoilers, spoilers throughout this whole thing. All right? Good, good. A lot of my issues with the movie are structural in nature, both within the film itself and in terms of its place in the overall Star Wars story. I have way less problems with the thematic elements that a lot of people seem to take issue with, which, that's more things like the nature of Rey and some things that happen, what is implied where things might be going in the future. People seem to, and some of the stuff with Luke, people seem to have big thematic fundamental issues with that. I don't. Most of my issues are execution. Most of the concepts going on in this movie, I am perfectly okay with, or even really like, but I still don't like the movie. So I kind of want to talk about the divide that's happening. And it's a divide, you could say it's between audiences and critics. Kind of depends on where you go, because, you can go to Rotten Tomatoes and the audience score is under 60%, which basically means it has a glowing critic score and a rotten audience score. But different sources are giving it different things. CinemaScore says something else. There's some other sites that have different things. So this is not a hard data thing when I say there's a divide. I'm going largely anecdotally. I'm going off what I've been watching going on over the last few days in my own comment section, and also, sort of gauging off of the kinds of reviewers and folks who I normally follow. And it's been interesting, and I have some thoughts about why the divide happened, because I can see the validity and a lot of the arguments that I actually have seen made by people who not only like the movie but have put out additional material since kind of the backlash has happened, defending the various aspects of the movie, including from people who I tend to agree with often and who honestly make good arguments. But I still don't agree. I still think there's a lot of really big issues with this. And honestly, ultimately, the big problems with this movie are more to do with its greater context and what has gone on in general around Star Wars, and less so with the movie itself. If you were to truly restrict issues with just the film, set everything else aside and basically deal with it in a vacuum, really, the only part is the middle act is a little bit too leisurely paced, and the stakes feel a little bit off. But it opens well, it ends well, the characters are strong, the themes are clear. There isn't a heck of a lot that's wrong with it taken as a film completely unto itself. It's within the greater context of Star Wars that things start to fall apart, which I think might be part of the reason that critics are being much more favorable to it than audience and certainly fans are, because I think it is more common for critics to try and look at the thing in isolation and deal with it completely as its own thing, and to not pull in as much baggage that we as fans tend to do, either because, it's just their job to review every movie and they may not be inherent fans of it, so they need to basically take it as its own film, or even if they are fans, there's basically the critical objective ideal, trying not to bring too much of your own baggage in an analysis, which I'm not sure I agree with in the first place, but is a thing that happens, and there's a lot of critics who may even be fans but aren't trying to let that sway their opinion excessively. So I think that's part of the divide. I think the other thing is I see a lot of people who really like the movie basically sort of praising the new direction that Star Wars is going and what this indicates for that. And In and of itself, I agree with that, but again, I put everything into context, and that's where it starts not working. So I'm gonna try and keep this focused, and as best as me and my ranty way can stay on topic and stay focused. But I'm gonna try and deal with specific things and then get to an overall point. If I can pull it off. We'll see. Let's start with Snoke. We basically not only don't get answers about him, but the fact that he is killed off removes the need to ever give us answers about this. And another thing I'm not going to deal with here is I am not going to be dealing with any theories that have anything to do with this whole notion of, oh, I bet it's a double, secret reveal and he'll come back and he'll do this and Rey will really have parents who met. No, there's nothing here to indicate that that is going to be the case. It's not impossible, but even if they do that, if they yank it back again in episode 9, that's going to be its own thing because they will have a completely incongruent trilogy of new films. But again, I'm not going to deal with that because that's all speculative. I want to deal with the movie that we actually have. And in terms of the movie we have, we didn't get answers, and the fact that he dies removes the impetus for us to ever get answers about Snoke. Now, I've seen the argument made that Snoke was never meant to be a mystery in the first place in The Force Awakens, and that the film itself doesn't really build him up as a mystery, pointing to such things as the fact that there aren't any characters who are asking questions about, we need to find out the secrets of Snoke, which would have been your big clue in that it was gonna actually be a part of the narrative that this stuff was uncovered. And there's a certain validity to that, and what I will grant is I think fans made a little bit of a mountain out of a molehill. Just, 2 years worth of speculation. I think we did make more out of the idea of trying to figure out who Snoke was than it was probably ever going to be worth. That said, this wasn't pulled out of nowhere, and I think the issue is, because I actually brought this up in my original review, and I must not have expressed myself properly because people kind of seemed muddled on what I was trying to say. For me, it's a problem at this point that we don't have answers on Snoke. But I don't feel that it's a problem that when in the original trilogy we didn't have answers on the Emperor because we didn't need them. And there's kind of a real key difference here, which is that they gave us just a little bit too much information about Snoke. The Emperor, honestly, in the original trilogy, we knew almost nothing about. We didn't even know the guy's name. We knew nothing about him. For all we know, he wasn't even the first emperor. He could have been the second. The empire could have been founded by somebody else. We didn't know. It didn't matter within the context of that first film. And there was no amount of information that we were given that really begged answering. Okay, this guy's ruling the empire. We can find out how he got there. Eventually we did. It wasn't very interesting. But you can find all that stuff out. But nothing about that original series of films, episodes 4, 5, and 6, demands answers to it. But with Snoke, there's one, and I know this is going to seem nitpicky, but I'm sorry, I'm not going to let this go. There's one specific detail that we are given in relation to Snoke that was not only hinted at in The Force Awakens, is reaffirmed in The Last Jedi, which means they didn't just bring it up once, they brought it up twice in 2 movies, and this is the reason why I don't think it's okay to kill him off and give us no answers in the way that they did. And that is, it is stated now in 2 separate films that it was Snoke who turned Kylo Ren to the dark side. Luke's words in The Last Jedi were, Snoke had already turned his heart by the time, Luke started to recognize the darkness in him. That is one detail too many, because that detail raises a ton of questions, not only about Snoke and Kylo Ren, but about Luke. Because if you're saying that Snoke is the reason Kylo Ren turned to the dark side, then how did he ever get to him? If he was off training with Luke, when and how did this guy ever get to him? It raises, that's just the main question that it raises, but it raises a ton of other questions as well. Did Luke know about this guy? And the way he tells the story seems to imply that he did. That one little nugget raises way too many questions to be ignored. If it had simply been a matter of he saw darkness in Kylo Ren and they simply imply that once he turned to the darkness, he gravitated towards dark forces, basically implying that Kylo Ren went dark on his own and then found Snoke after, that would have been fine. I need no more information about that because exactly how they got in touch with each other doesn't matter. But if the reason Kylo Ren is in with the dark side of the Force is because of this guy, and that's what the movies have said pretty blatantly, then that is too big a question to not address. And there's another thing beyond that. Even if I accept that I am also getting overly hung up on this, because admittedly I'm focusing on this one detail, but again, it's a detail brought up in both movies, not just one of them. But even if I set that aside, I'm puzzled by the way in which Disney and Lucasfilm basically chose to not handle and manage the fans. Because if we were never going to get answers on Snoke, or failing that, if it was decided during the making of The Last Jedi that, you know what, we could have done answers, but we're not going to because we feel it's distracting from what we actually want to do. Whether it was always the plan to never give answers or was a decision made later, doesn't matter. In either case, how could they look at 2 solid years of rampant, fervent theorizing and speculation around this character that just builds up his importance more and more and more, and nobody involved went, you know, guys, if we're just gonna toss this guy aside and have the narrative basically say he doesn't matter, people might get ticked off because they're making a big deal out of him. Like, how do you not address that in some fashion? Because look, and how? I don't know how. I don't know if you have one of the directors come out or Kathleen Kennedy come out and say, guys, Snoke doesn't matter so much. And I understand that would suck out the fun, but like, how do you do nothing? How do you stand back, watch the hype machine go completely out of your hands and go in an insane direction that you are not going to fulfill? And in fact, you are creating a movie that in many ways kind of thumbs its nose at this entire thing. How do you just let that happen? How do you let that train just get that far away from you and you go, you know what? I'm sure it'll be fine. You leave fans to our own devices and we will construct this entire next movie that we want, and then if you fail to deliver it, we will get upset. Now, is that the fault of the movie? No, that's kind of fan culture. We tend to do that a bit. But it's just really weird to me that a franchise and a company, Star Wars as a franchise as managed by Lucasfilm, and Disney as a general corporation has a pretty strong track record at keeping its finger on the pulse of their fans and keeping their expectations in check. Just didn't bother trying to do that in this case. And somewhat on a similar note is Rey and the whole thing with Rey's parents are nobody. Now, I am on record, even before The Force Awakens came out, like its first trailers, saying I didn't want her to be anybody. I never wanted her to be anybody. I always wanted her to just be a new Force user. In my mind, there is no reason for her to be related to a Skywalker's, Kenobi's, whoever. Like, it's frustrating to me when people are like, only the Skywalkers can be this powerful. It's weird and it's kind of elitist and it's a mentality that I'm like, why? Why must it be that way? So, it's a notion that I like. I like the fact that she is not related to anybody and she is just strong with the Force. That happens sometimes. That's effectively what happened with Anakin. Whether you buy into the Immaculate Conception thing or not, he was nobody before he just exhibited all these Force powers. So again, I don't totally get where the hangups on that on the conceptual level are. On the execution level, however, there are problems because much like Snoke, if the idea was to always have it be that she was nobody, then it was a really poor decision to set up very blatant mysteries around her in the film. And I think much more so than Snoke, who I think you can be more valid in arguing it didn't really build any mysteries, there was around Rey. There was a lot of blatant hinting and obscuring of who her parents were, who she might be. Everyone's asking these questions. Who's this girl? The film itself is making a deal out of this. And to then turn around after, again, 2 years worth of rampant speculation to go, she's nobody. Again, I like that as a premise, but how do you not realize you are going to tick off a whole bunch of people doing it that way? And I even say that recognizing that it's part of Rey's journey, that she kind of is in denial about the fact that she is nobody, and she wants to become part of the legend of this universe. And in her mind, the only way she can be that is if she is somehow related to people who are already the legends in this universe. I get that as a function of her character and her growth and her development. But I still think it's a bad way to do it. I think they needed to just plant their flag in this in episode 7 and go, look, she's not related to anybody. She's just strong with the Force. The Force has awakened in her. That's the name of the movie. Deal with it. Instead, by doing all these hints that maybe there's something about her past and her history, and then for everyone involved to spend the last 2 years fanning the flame by not dousing it, if nothing else, yeah, of course people are ticked off about that. Even beyond, whether or not they have a fundamental issue with that concept, which again, I don't, but I don't think this was a smart way to execute that. And in many ways, you can feel the fact that this is not an overall planned out trilogy, that J.J. Abrams made a film with strands to be picked up later. Rian Johnson came in and made a film about what he wanted to do. And I don't have an inherent problem with that way of making a film, except that this is a series that has had, in the various trilogies that it can be broken into, episodes 1, 2, 3, episodes 4, 5, 6, there is a through line and you can see where things are going. And I mean, George Lucas likes to build up his own myth about how much of 5 and 6 were already planned when he did the original Star Wars. And I don't think it's nearly as planned out as he likes to make it look, but at the very least, things weren't as jarringly feeling like they were like just veering off from where things started. And that's the thing. I think if this movie had been episode 7, and I don't mean like plot structure, like, oh, we just don't do that, but like in terms of the themes, in terms of what it's doing, in the way in which it is a very different Star Wars movie, if this had been episode 7, I think we'd be having a very different conversation. There would still be people ticked off at it, I have no doubt. But the difference would be you'd be kicking off a new trilogy by going, this is how this is different from all the other Star Wars that came before. Instead, what they did, they kicked off the new trilogy with a film that was soaked in nostalgia for the original trilogy. So you kick off this new trilogy by going, look how much we're like old Star Wars, and then you continue it by going, we are not like old Star Wars. And that in my mind is kind of cruel to your audience, because I think there's a whole chunk of Star Wars fandom that went into The Force Awakens and they may not have been happy about it, but if they got something more along the lines of The Last Jedi, they just would have gone, okay, you know what? This new trilogy is not being made for me. I'm going to walk away. I've got my original stuff. New fans and other people, they can have this new trilogy. But instead, they give such a huge chunk of the old fan base exactly what they've always been clamoring for. And then, with the very next follow-up, seem to go out of their way to deconstruct all the stuff that they love. And again, that makes for an okay movie in and of itself. But in terms of an overall thing, of course there's a backlash. I mean, and again, that's the thing. That's what I mean when I say it's placed in the franchise as a whole. If this had been the start of the new trilogy, it would have set the tone for that. But this is not consistent with the tone that The Force Awakens set. It feels incredibly disjointed. It really truly does feel like Rian Johnson came in, looked at what J.J. Abrams had done, and just didn't want to do what he did and went in another way. In many ways, actually, honestly, it reminded me of the Justice League movie, because the Justice League movie just flat out ignored or dropped or hand waved away so much stuff that was set up in Batman v Superman. But there it made sense because so many people didn't like Batman v Superman. They were like, okay, well, we're not going to continue with that through line because people weren't liking it. We're going in a new direction because that one wasn't working. By and large, people liked The Force Awakens. I know it's like a weirdly popular thing now to act like it wasn't really that great. But by and large, people like The Force Awakens. And to coming off of something that people liked and accepted and were excited for the next thing, and to just go, nah, there's all this stuff in it that I don't want to deal with. I'm doing something else. Just seems really weird to me. And doubly so when you take into account that these are not the only Star Wars movies we get. If you want to go in a completely different direction and explore completely new themes in Star Wars, especially after you've already established with the start of your new trilogy how much you're honing in on the vibe of the originals, why are you doing it in the main series instead of doing it in one of the spin-offs? And if you're not going to go in completely new directions than the spin-offs, what's the point of the side stories and the spin-offs? And that's why, like, I don't know how to feel at this point about the fact that Rian Johnson is going to do 3 Star Wars movies as a complete separate trilogy. I'm kind of the mind of, I wish they just hired him and had him done that from the get-go and didn't have him do Episode 8, because there is a lot of deconstruction in Episode 8, and deconstruction is not in and of itself a bad thing. In fact, some of the best, most potent stories can be deconstructionist stories. But to make a comparison of some of the really great deconstructionist stories from, say, comic books, that would be things like Watchmen, The Dark Knight Returns, Superman Red Son. But there's a key thing with all 3 of those. They're all Elseworlds or possible futures or otherwise not part of the main continuity. I don't think deconstruction works when you make it part of the main story, especially if you're expecting to continue that story on after you've done it. When you deconstruct something, by its nature, you take it apart and you break it. So why would you do that in the main series when you have the ability to do these kind of deconstructionist elements and, poke at the legend of the Jedi and how valid they are or aren't or whatever else? You have more than enough room to do that in other ways, to do it in other films. I don't understand why it's part of the main series here. And beyond that, if they're going to do that, I don't understand why everyone seems so shocked that so many fans are backlashing on this. And that's kind of my main thing. There are other things that I could talk about. I'll just touch on briefly, mostly to say why I'm not going to talk about them more. People talking about Luke being out of character. Depends on how you want to define Luke's character. Because speaking as someone who loves the movies, the original trilogy at the very least, but never got into expanded universe or any of that, Luke's character is actually pretty consistent with how he was in the movies. Because Luke's entire arc in those first 3 movies was basically him continuously edging up to right at the precipice of going dark, even dipping his toe into it and then pivoting back. And I don't see how him just firing up his lightsaber but immediately thinking, oh god, no, what am I doing, and not going through with it is any different than the other times that he stepped into darkness and came back. However, if you are really attached to the expanded universe stuff that has been done with Luke, that's where it becomes inconsistent. And again, this factors into what I said before, which is that when you look at the film within the context of this franchise, that's where a lot of these problems happen. Now, a lot of people have built up their image of what Luke should be like at this age based on a lot of expanded universe stuff that had gone on and built a very specific image of older Jedi Master Luke. And this is not that. Now, again, is that necessarily fair to the movie? Should it be beholden to what was done in something that they deliberately declared is no longer canon? No, not necessarily, but at the same time, if you're gonna go against that when you know it's ingrained in the fan culture, even though you told them to please not pay attention to it, you can't be shocked when a chunk of your audience says, no, you got it wrong. Another common complaint seems to be the humor in the film. For me, the humor was fine. If I were to pinpoint the thing, because it initially struck me as odd, because you go back and watch the original Star Wars, there's actually a lot of humor in that. I mean lines like, little short for a stormtrooper, somebody got this big walking carpet out of my way, it was a boring conversation anyway. Those are funny lines, and there's quite a few of them. I think the difference, though, might be is that in the original films, or at the very least that that first film that I just cited, those jokes are lines said by characters and reactions to situation. They're not set up punchline. And I think a little bit more of the humor in The Last Jedi feels set up punchline, which is a different kind of humor to one snarky line because of the situation we're in. So maybe that's the issue there. One thing I'm not going to dwell on, though, is Leia, because I know a lot of people, it seems like almost everybody, hates the Leia in space moment. I don't. I love it. I seem to be one of only a handful of people who love it. And more to the point, so far as I can tell, I'm the only person who loves that moment but does not like the film overall. I seem to be the only one in that particular camp. But it's fine. I thought it was a wonderful, triumphant moment. If you want to make the argument to me that visually it looks a little goofy, I don't agree, but you know what? I'll give a certain amount of merit to that. If the emotion didn't connect with you, yeah, okay, maybe it looks a little off. The whole thing about she shouldn't be able to do that makes no sense to me, because we already know she's force sensitive, and what she's doing is such a basic thing. And don't give me like she hasn't been trained. Luke had his lightsaber come to his hand at the start of The Empire Strikes Back in the Wampa Cave. He had never been trained on how to do that. Really, the only training he gotten at that point from Obi-Wan was the vaguest sense of stretch out with your feelings and how to hold a lightsaber so he didn't kill himself. That was it, but he still was able to do that. So I don't see why it's such a leap that Leia should be able to pull herself towards the ship. I don't agree that that's an issue. Again, if you have an issue with that, you think the visual was just goofy, again, don't agree, but that's harder for me to argue with. So I think I'm done. I intended to kind of build to a grander point, but I think I ended up making my point more like 2/3 of the way in and then just tacking on a few additional things at the tail end. Honestly, I'm just trying to expunge this thing. I want to stop thinking about this movie, and I'm hoping that in doing this video, I'll have gotten enough of my thoughts out there, clarified some of the stuff that I said before, responded to some of the stuff that I've seen said and gone on since then, that I can kind of be done talking about this movie for a while. And again, before anybody asks, maybe I'll watch it again, and maybe I will think different of it on a rewatch. Right now, I'm not planning to, because I don't want to. And that does make a difference, because, you know, to cite some other movies that I was either uncertain or kind of iffy on but liked much better on the second watch, Wonder Woman, the flaws seem much smaller to me second time I watched that. Guardians of the Galaxy, the few issues I had seemed way more minor second time I watched it. Hell, The Force Awakens, I wasn't sure what I thought of it coming out of the theater, but I woke up the next day going, no, I really like this. This one, I just don't want to watch it again. Not right now, anyways. And I definitely just want to stop thinking about it. So that'll wrap it up for this one, and hopefully it'll be the last time I have to talk about Star Wars for a while. So that's it for me, folks. What are your current thoughts on not just the movie, but the backlash, responses to the backlash, etc., etc.? Keep it respectful, please. Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Like, subscribe, all the stuff. I'm on Twitter at Council of Geeks. I have a podcast, the Council of Geeks podcast, Apple Podcasts, and Stitcher Radio. I'm also one half of the Punch Like a Girl podcast. That's on the Fire and Water Podcast Network, fireandwaterpodcast.com. Until next time, this council is adjourned.